Hey, hello, this is lesson 5. Today we'll be talking about arrays and objects and if we get to a DOM manipulation. So, first of all, arrays are basically just lists. It can be as long as you want it to be, so it's useful for storing certain things. Like, for example, if you want a list of things that the user wants to buy, you wouldn't want to store each one in a separate variable because then you would get confused as to how many variables there are. So a list is basically you can put multiple values in one variable and they're ordered. To write an array, you can uh, a square bracket here, and then add an item, which can be anything. So it can be a string, a number, boolean, which is true or false, or it can even be another array. So here, if I make an array for the people in this class right now, I'll input these all as strings because they're names, so they're text. And also I'll separate each string with a comma. That tells JavaScript that, oh, this is a new element. And we can do something like, oh, copy this over. So we can store the array in a variable, and when we access that variable, we will get the array. So arrays have indexes, which are basically the item numbers. So if you have item 1 in arrays, that will be index 0, because in computer science we like to count from 0. So the first element is going to be element 0, the second element is element 1, all the way to here the last element is the sixth item, which is index 5. So this will be one of the more confusing parts of an array where it's not super intuitive. So if you want to get the third element, you'll have to access the fourth, sorry, if you want the third item, you want to access the second index, or if you want the sixth item, you want to access the fifth index. So sometimes you will make mistakes when accessing arrays. Just a good rule to keep in mind is the item number -1 is to index. So we can access the things inside an array using its index. So basically, I have this list here, users in this class, and I want to get the third item, so I'll do users in this class, and then use square brackets, and inside I'm going to put the index that I want to access. So that's the third element, which means it's the second index. I'll do 2, and sure enough, if you count 1, 2, 3, that is the third item. So if you want to set a specific, if you want to set a specific value inside an array, for example, if I change my name to just, if I just change my name to Lucas, now I can update the array by doing users in this class, square bracket 0, because I'm trying to access the first element. And right now it's telling me that that is currently Lucas Wang. Now I'm going to use an equal sign and assign it to Lucas. It's basically the same thing as if you were using a variable that you already declared. So like pretend I declared name equals Lucas playing earlier, I can just do name equals Lucas. here basically exact same thing except we're doing it into an array. So then if I access users in this class, it will say Lucas rich code shell. So if you want to change up or access any element in the array, you have to use its index. And you can also use the value if you know the value, but that's a bit counterintuitive, but I'll get to that later. So as I mentioned before, you can also put arrays inside other arrays. So this is useful where you have a more complex data structure. For example, if I have a list of users, but then there, so for example, I have four groups, three groups called Yankee, Dremel, and E. Instead of just putting them all in one array, I can put them in three arrays and put that all three of those arrays in another array. So that's called a nested array, where one array is inside another. So now if I if I make a nested array here, uh, just copy this over. Uh, we'll have to convert this to JavaScript quotation mark real quick. Hmm. This is also something to be aware of. If you type quotation marks elsewhere, it's going to show up as those starting and ending one. But in JavaScript, especially if you're coding inside software that's not meant to support code, you could end up with this issue your where your characters don't line up with the ones that you're supposed to have. So if I get the nested array and get the second item in it, which is the first index, then you'll see I get this array as the output. Now, if I want to access something inside this array, I can do this, and then from here, since this is an array, I can put another square bracket after that, and say I want to access the fourth element, the third index, and it will give me that. So basically what you're saying is, I want to access the first index of the big array, the array that encompasses everything, which is going to be the list of Dremels. And then from there, I want to access the third index, which is the fourth item. So then it will give me Dremel 4. So assignment is also like what we had before. If we have something, if I want to replace Yankee 1 with, you see, if I put 0, 0, that means going to the first item and then the first item of that array. That's Yankee 1. And I want to set that to Yankee 4. Actually, Yankee 5. So then if I access users again, it will give me an array. You see Yankee 5 is the first thing here, and then Yankee 2, 3, 4. So to manipulate arrays, you also have a few other methods, not just using the index to access something or set something. The first one is going to be here, one of the most common ones you're going to use, which is push. Basically, what push does is it just adds something to the end of this list. So here, Uh, if I do this, just like really simple code here, declare an array, and then push cows to the end. You'll see it's just an array with cows added to the end. What push also does is it ri- it gives you a count. So if I run this, it will tell me 4 because after we push cows in, the array will have 4 items. So now if I can, so after I push cows, I can push chickens, cats, and dogs again. And now it's going to say pigs, goats, sheep, cows, chickens, cats, and dogs. So just adding stuff to the end. And as you see here, you can also add multiple things to the end at the same time. Second one, you want, so for example, if you want specific users, if you have a list of users like we had before and you want to get first one to the fifth one, you can use slice. So what slice does is it basically just takes the array like it's a cake and takes and slices it up and gives you one of the slices. Uh, okay, so yes, an array can contain other arrays, like here. So I have this array and it has some numerical values and it has a string in it and it also has another array in it with true and false. And here with the nested arrays, you see that this big array surrounded by these two square brackets is actually just composed of 3 arrays. Like there are no elements that are not arrays in that list. So back to slice. Uh, so slice has uh 2 parameters, start and end. If you do not give it an end, then it will basically just go to the very end of the array. So if I do array animals.slice 2 here, then it will count. This is 0, this is 1, this is 2. So 2 starts at camel. So it takes index 2, index 3, index 4, and there's nothing else. So what it ends up returning is going to be camel, duck, elephant. Now, if I slice 2 to 4, so this is going to be 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 2, 3, 4. Uh, here is going to give me camel and duck because it includes the first index, but it says, oh, here's 4, so I'm not going to include it. So all we're going to take is camel and duck. The start value is inclusive, but the end value is exclusive. So if you wanted to get the second to fourth indexes inclusive, then you're gonna want to do like 2, 5. So that's about it for slice right now. Once we get to negative indexes, there will be a bit more. So there's also a method called map where you can go through an array through its elements one by one. So this is an arrow function, which we have not learned yet, so we'll place it. So here, basically, what this function is doing is it's taking in a number and returning the number times 2, and it's in an array.map, which means that it goes through array 1. So first of all, it gives the number 1 to this function. So you're running the function with num equals 1, so it returns 2. Now map map one is going to make a new array and set the 0th index, the first item, to 2. Now it's going to move on to 4, and then times that by 2, and then add 4 to the end of the new array, and then 9 times 2 equals 18 to the end of that array, and then 15 times 2 equals 32 to the end of the array, and finally we have everything in the array times 2. So this is going to be useful if you want to go through an array and paint everything in a specific way, or you're looking for something, like for example, if you don't return it, and you don't return, the array one is not going to be affected. So if I have a function with no returns, this is not going to be affected at all. So in here, I can put something like if num is equal to 4, then console.log, there is a 4 in here. So this is useful if you want to go through an array and check if there's a specific person. And we're on MDM web docs right now. This is by Mozilla, which makes Firefox. They have a bunch of great JavaScript documentation. So if you don't understand a method or want to learn about like some new method to do something, especially with like arrays or objects, then you can go to MDM web docs and uh, go to their array section, and they have basically all the different methods that you can use on arrays here. A lot of a lot of these are useful, but not used that much. So, like to reverse, just literally reverses the array. You have sort, which you can sort an array with. I'm just, I'm not gonna go over every one of these because chances are you're gonna forget if I go over a ton of these. So when you need to use them, just search out. And then length of array is just going to be array dot length, or as you see later, array bracket length. So objects, they don't be fooled by the name. They're not physical objects. Like you cannot hold them. You cannot make representations of physical objects. I have no idea why they're called objects because it makes things a bit more confusing. Well, objects are basically just dictionaries. So if you've ever opened a dictionary before, there are words and definitions. So objects are kind of like that, but instead of having words, they have keys, and instead of definitions, have values. So in an object, there are multiple pairs, like how many ever you want, where it's just a key correlated to a value, and they're in pairs. So here, name and Brandon are a key value pair. So you're essentially saying that the name is Brandon inside this object, inside the curly braces. Uh, so objects are kind of like arrays in that in, instead of just having numbers for the keys, that's one way to think about an array. You have basically just words or anything that can be a variable. You just set that as the key instead of a random number, and you're going to surround it in by curly braces. Again, put everything with commas, and between the key and value, you're going to put a colon. To, that's basically like an equal sign when you're declaring a variable. You're just saying the name is equal to Brandon, but just use a colon. Like arrays, they can also be nested. So basically, I have not defined nested yet. So nested is when something that can contain itself is containing itself. So, for example, an array contains an array, and that array may or may not contain another array. So you can go in. So you know how a nest has like an outer layer, and inside there's like more straw, and then you go in more, and there's like even more straw. It's like kind of a concentric circles. You can do that with arrays and objects, so that you can have like five layers of arrays where it's like an array inside of another array inside of another array inside of another array, or same thing with objects. Those are called nested arrays or nested objects. So here I have uh an object called order. You see I have some key value pairs that are just strings, a number. But here, notice I can also put an array in here. So for example, if I'm coding something for a fast food restaurant and they want a system to store their current orders, I can use an object. So for the first order, I can use an object to store the name of the cashier, the name of the customer, how much they paid, and the items they have. So that, like, for example, the kitchen can make it, or they know how much they made at the end of the day. And these nested data structures are going to be more useful when you're actually creating something like a user database, or basically any database in general, where you're storing more complex data than just a list of things or key value pairs. So here I have inside the array we have another object, and so here each of these objects represent an item. So the name of the first object is going to be fries, and the note is add cheese, and so on. So in fact, I could turn the note into an array. So then I could say like add cheese, double ketchup, add mustard, add onion. Now accessing object values. So it's very much like how you would do it with an array. Hmm. So we have the two objects from before. So user dot name. So we're taking user name is Brandon, and you may have realized that we used this a bit before. So window dot alert. Sorry. So window dot alert. There's a dot and then alert. So that is actually an object. Window is an object. So if I try and access window here, you'll see it's defined as object. So that's why we can do window.alert. Hmm. So user.name is Brandon. User.age is going to be 34. Hmm. And if we go to this more complex object, then we can do order.items. So we go here, we look at items, and this is an array, right? So we take the index 1 of this array, and this is index 0, this is index 1, so it's going to be this cheeseburger entry. And then we take dot notes. So we're accessing the nodes of this object here, and that is going to be double ketchup. Another, ooh, so sorry about that. Another way to do that is using square brackets, where you have a user and then square brackets, and then the key in a string, because these are words and you want them in a string. And you can, that also is Brandon. User square bracket age is 34. So, where this comes in useful is if you have something like the user is telling you, oh, I want to access the age. So, uh, So, for example, if I type in items, then I type in get, that will give me items. Where this is useful is I cannot really do, for example, user.get because that's trying to get the actual, like if there was an entry named get here, then it would try and get that. But I'm trying to get the thing that what the variable get is actually representing, which is items. So here I can do something like user items. And so with that, I have not defined user yet. So if I just define that real quick, user, oh, um, there's item, users get will be cheeseburger. So what it's doing right now is reading get and it's coming up with items. So what it's doing is users items, which is going to be cheeseburger because that's essentially the same thing as saying users dot items. And you can use these in conjunction to each other. So like if you have order items, you get that with a square bracket. You can also use dot ID then because it's doing the exact same thing. So adding key pair values is instead of having something like dot push, because dot push literally adds something to the end of the array, here you don't know what's the end of the object because there's no sequence to it. So you will need to define it by setting something with like this. So if if I grab this object here and then I try and get orders and then I get the cash here, that's gonna return Brandon. I'm gonna say like the manager takes over and now Sally is the cashier here. So I can set the cashier of the order to Sally. And now if I get order, it will say cashier Sally, and everything else will be the same. So that's editing an item. Now, if you want to add an item, for example, if there's a special fee that I have to add, I can do fees equals, I can set order.fees, and since it's basically just setting a variable, uh, it just sets it inside it just sets it inside of the object, but do not use any variable declarations like let or var or const, because sometimes that will get messy. And what basically those do is it defines a scope and if you want it to be constant or not. And in an object, those don't really matter because the scope of the item inside of the object is just going to be the same scope as the object. Because if you can't access the object, then you can't access the item inside. So here we have deleting items in key value pairs, and you can use this is very simple. This is one of the reasons I like JavaScript. Delete, and then you can just do order dot cashier, and then I kind of get order again. Now there's no cashier anymore. It's just really simple like that. If I have if I have an array, for example, 4, 3, 5, 8. 2, and then I try and delete nums 1, which is going to be the second item, and I try and access nums again, hope be empty, because it kind of, with an array, there's the complication of the length needs to stay the same, so none of the indexes will shift. Now, for the type of keyword, type of, since we're learning about types of data here, arrays, objects, we need to be able to identify them in the code. So using the type of, we can do type of empty curly brackets, which will be an empty array. So type of, it will return object. So this is useful if you want to go through, say, an array and you want to filter out all the objects. So if you want to create a simplified version of the database that does not include all the, for example, like lists of items, then you can do something like an if statement. If item of item, then we delete item. Something like that. So for is a number, so it's gonna return number. A string is gonna return just string. Object is just gonna return an object. And it's just all gonna be lowercase. If you ever forget this, you can just go to a console, type in type of something, and it will tell you. So here's the kind of wacky thing about arrays in JavaScript. If you do type of and then an array, like it will give you object. Now the reason for this is if I actually go in and type in an array, and I click into it, you're gonna see this. So that doesn't really look like an array anymore. You're gonna It kind of looks like an object where 0 is set to 4, 1 is set to 3, 2 is set to 5, 3 is set to 8, and then the length is 4. And this has to do with how JavaScript actually stores an array. It stores it as an object. Well, not necessarily an object. It stores it as a node list, just a special type of object. And so now, if you go back here, this actually makes more sense now, because like if you're accessing the 0 of this array, so I said if I set that to a list and then I do a list uh square brackets 2, you notice that it's actually just going in here and getting the index called 2, which is actually just a key in a key value pair, and it points to 5. So this is useful where you basically just when you want to check if something is an array and it comes up as object, do not be surprised. And also, there is still a way to tell if it's an array where you have array. Now this is the prototype array. It's a global. So it is array. And then I do some kind of array here, and it will tell me true. If I put an object in here, it says false. So if you want to check for arrays, just be sure to use isArray instead of type of. Okay, now if you want to iterate through an object, it gets a bit more complicated because there's not really an order, as I mentioned before. You're going to want to use something called object.keys. So here we have array.isArray. You see, it's basically array. Array is going to be a prototype, which means like it's going to be a model for every array in JavaScript. So like a drawing book template, you take a drawing book template and you color it in, and that's an array. But then here, I'm just accessing the coloring book, and it has a method called isArray, which you can use to check if something is an array. Similarly, object has its own coloring book called object, and it has a method called keys that basically just takes an object and gets all the keys in it. So if I take the keys of order, then it will give me actually an array, which is actually secretly list. But it has a customer, total, item, and fees. Sorry. And if we go into order, we can see that indeed it has the keys of customer, uh total, item, and fees. So this is useful because if I have the object.keys of an object, then what I can do is I can iterate through that, pretending that it's just another array. So if I want to delete in here everything that is a number, so his age and the order number, then I can do if type of user bracket key is equal to number. So we're using a map here. So the key is going to be, we're just going to start off with using name. Now the access user name, which is going to be Brandon. The type of Brandon is not going to be a number, so this is not going to run. Same thing happens with position manager. Manager is not a number, so it continues to run. Then when we get to age, the type of user age is going to be 34, which is the type of that is going to be a number. So this is going to return true, and we're going to delete user key. So we're going to delete his age. Then same thing happens with the order number. So if we run this, all we're going to have left is name and position. Okay, so we have around 15 minutes left of class. Right now, I believe that all the projects under RICHCODE.js static are used up. So I am going to teach you how to expand that and how to access other HTML files. So let me just wait for this to load up. So this is our old project from quite a while ago. So as you see, I have this static folder here, and then a server.js. This is written in node.js, which is going to be JavaScript which runs on a server. So what this part is basically doing is it's taking the static folder and serving it. So letting your browser access it. If I do node npm start here, what it's basically doing is it's running server.js. So if I go here, you see there's the three links, right? Now this path, since there's nothing .html after this, secretly just index.html. Because when your computer goes to some random website, what it looks for is there a page at this exact location? It says no, so I'm gonna assume that this is a folder and look for the home page inside of this folder. And the rule with HTML and basically how the, the file serving works is that the home page is always going to be listed as index.html. So these two essentially load the exact same file. So do not touch anything outside of static because that will potentially make this whole thing not work. But this index.html here, that's just in static and not in projects. This is going to be the home page that you see here. And you see there's a bit of CSS, and I actually have linked the projects. So here, if you remember from the last lesson on paths, you can do uh, hmm, project. I probably spelled that wrong. Ooh. So if I just go to projects one, then that's essentially what that's doing is it's just doing index HTML. Now, if I make a new folder in static, that's uh, called something like new project, and I add an index.html here, I can navigate to new projects because static is going to be basically the slash here, and then from static, path is going to be new projects, and then index.html, and it's going to tell me hello world, because that's the HTML file here. Now, first, I just coded this so that you could jump right into the project without worrying about the paths. But now what I want you to do is open projects and then actually use this button here, add a new folder, call it 4. And then here, you can add an index.html and a script.js. From, from last lesson, remember that you can link a script using the script tag. So script force equals script.js. So what I want you to do here is remember from last lesson the button. Basically do something like the last lesson, except you're going to apply it to this project, where basically you're just clicking a button to run the script by having a function here called game. And here I'm just basically outlining your what your code is going to look like. So so add a folder called for in projects, add an index.html and a script.js, and you can access it via the URL bar. And if you think that's a bit too complicated, you can even just go here, copy paste that, and change that to 4. So that you now will have, hmm, we got to change that one. We'll now have a link to project 4. And you can basically do that with all the future projects. So I'm not going to provide a template for you except for a few. Now, in number 4, work on 2 things. You can run this one after another in a single function, or you can run them in 2 different functions, and so like have 2 different buttons. So first of all, ask the user to input items continuously into the list until they enter stop, and then you repeat the items back to them using window.alert from the last thing they entered to the first thing they entered. So if you want, you can go back to MDN web docs. You can search this up to like array reverse JavaScript, and then here the first result it's going to give you is from MDN web docs. So you can read and use this method if you want, or you can do something else if you want. You can use array.map and store the array backwards if that really is what you want to do. And then second one is ask the user to describe something. Ask them for like a keyword, for example, taste, color, or size, and then ask for what that keyword's value is. Like it's the taste is sweet, color is red, the size is small, and then you tell the user, oh, the object's color is red, the object's taste is sweet, the object size is small, for example. So you have until the end of class, which is around 9 minutes to do that. If you have any questions, you can always just pop it in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, so that's just about it. We'll get to dominant manipulation next class. Uh, I'll probably ask you guys to share your solutions for this test to how next class. So for now, you're free to go. Bye.
Okay, so I'm working on some code, but I'm not finished yet. Here's the
Oh,
JavaScript.
okay.
Okay, I'll send over the JavaScript. Here's the code.
I mean, like, send it over next class.
Oh, sure. It's okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye.